Okay, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to today's webinar. We will be diving on fortified whole grains, specifically processing standards and market opportunities. So it is a pleasure to have you join today's conversation. Good morning, Charles. Welcome. It is a pleasure to have you join today's conversation as we unpack the growing interest and the pressing needs of fortified whole grains across food systems in Africa and beyond. Before we start, good morning to you too, Sarah. I want to take this opportunity to thank our Fortified Whole Grain Alliance for sponsoring this webinar. Fortified Whole Grain Alliance is an organization that is dedicated to providing catalytic support to food system actors to increase the consumption and production of fortified whole grains globally. And this conversation matters, or this conversation is important because globally grains are consumed in large numbers. And if you just look at East Africa alone, maize, primarily as flour, contributes to 30 or between 30 and 50% of total daily caloric intake in most households. So what this means is these grains, they have enormous potential to shift the nutrition landscape. But the unfortunate thing is most of these grains or most of these grains are consumed in refined flour, meaning they're stripped of essential nutrients. We're talking about vitamins, we're talking about minerals, we're talking about protein, we're talking about dietary fiber, and that is what is consumed in most households. So as staples, these grains, they have enormous potential to deliver better in terms of health impact, in terms of having commercial viability. So how do we do this? Again, it's rethinking or relooking how these grains are processed and how the food industry actors can support in ensuring that we have high quality, nutritious products in the market that can impact health. So today we'll be looking at the foundations, the technical foundations, and the business realities of fortified whole grains and how we can position these products to deliver health impact and commercial viability. I'll be your host for the next 1 hour. My name is Magdalene Widali. I work with Fortified Whole Grain Alliance as a senior associate and also am a nutritionist by profession. With me on this call, I have two excellent speakers, people in the grain industry, people who understand the grain industry, who will be joining us in this conversation to unpack the conversation. We have Jones David, a senior technical specialist and a leading expert in grain processing. And we have Claude, a managing director of Maui Grain Millers, one of the biggest millers in Rwanda, and a business leader working directly with fortified whole grains. So welcome, everyone. Please take your time to share your comments, share your questions on the comment section. We're going to have a couple of minutes towards the end of the conversation just to address 2 or 3 questions. Thank you, and I'll hand over to the speakers to introduce themselves at large. So we can start with Jones David, and then we go to Jean Cloud. Over to you, Jones.
Thanks, Magdalene. My name is Jones Zioki David, and I'm a food technologist by training and food engineering specialist as well. I've been in the industry for close to 25 years, handling different streams and having done both operations and also administrative elements. Today, I sit here to unpack the issues to do with the production of fortified whole grains, and I represent the Fortified Whole Grain Alliance as the lead technical person to engage you and I will be willing to take any concerns and looking forward for a healthy discussion. Thank you. Over to Jean Claude.
Thank you, Magdalene. Thank you, Jones, for this opportunity. As announced before, my name is Jean-Claude Uwizeyemungu. I'm here representing, not as said by Magdalene, one of the largest, but it's the largest miller in Rwanda. We've joined this Fortified Whole Grain initiative in 2023. Prior to that, of course, we're in the milling industry. We've been in for the last 10 years, as you announced, doing only refined maize flour. So when we heard about this initiative, looked into the advantages, we were the first to join the initiative, and here we are with some experiences to share. And I hope as the webinar goes along, we'll have an opportunity to share more. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that intro, Jean Claude and Jones David. Again, still welcoming the participants. I can see they're still streaming in from different parts of Africa. Please feel free to post your questions and comments on the comment section. So let's dive into the conversation. And we start first by laying the foundation to this conversation. And Jones David, we can start with you. Help us understand what exactly qualifies fortified whole grain products and what are the key processing standards and regulations, especially in East Africa.
Thanks, Magdalene, once again. And once more, I welcome everybody. And I will be brief because quite a number of people have heard about whole grains. But your first question on defining what whole grains is, and possibly maybe comparing it with refined grains and specifically to refined flour. One, I would say for the case of East Africa, I would be referencing a lot to maize. And when I'm talking of whole grains, for the case of West Africa, I would be referencing to rice. And also for the case of North Africa, I will be referencing to wheat. So I want to possibly answer this question in 5 parts. One is what are whole grains? Then secondly, why whole grains? And the other bit will be what is fortification, and then what then is fortified whole grains and why. And the last one, I would take a brief mention on what refined flour or the refined products are. So to start, the whole grains, what we mean technically is these are grains that have not had any of their parts or components removed or separated. Meaning that they constitute all the nutrients as provided by Mother Nature. And ideally, it will differ from grain to grain. And there's, I would possibly say, all the edible parts of a grain as grown or as harvested from the field. That's what we reference as whole grains. And then the question is, why whole grains? We all know, and it's widely acknowledged that whole grains are healthy and nutritious as they contain a lot of both macro and micronutrients required for good nourishment for our bodies. A case in point, of course, many people know that whole grains do carry the fiber component in it, which is good in digestion, is also good for the gut. And many studies have also shown that it plays an important part in deterring some forms of cancers. And also the bioactive compounds present in whole grains have also been documented to contain quite a number of numerous health benefits. So the other question is then, what is fortification, which in some kind of context is not well understood. The practice of fortification is actually to deliberately increase the content of basically the essential micronutrients, that is vitamins and minerals, in a food product, so as to improve its nutritional quality, because there's no food that is comprehensively complete in terms of what the body requires. And this provides an easy channel to gain a good level of public health with benefits to minimal risk to health. Then the other question, the fourth part of this is I would then want to ask myself, what then is fortified whole grains and why? we know that, like I've said, whole grains actually have they are whole, or they are quite rich in terms of nutrition. And the question many people do ask is, why do we have to fortify them? One of the key things is that most staples in low and medium income countries, diets usually constitute one staple, and there's no one particular staple that is rich enough in terms of what the body requires, both macro and micronutrients. So fortified whole grains improve their nutritional value, and it's important just to mention, in a very cost-effective and efficient, and is quite inexpensive and simple way, or a strategy actually to complement or to fight malnutrition. We have confirmed and proved that fortification of whole grains can actually be nutrition positive in a budget neutral way, substituting what the existing refined foods in a way that you're not spending anymore. And actually, in some cases, we've also established that they could actually be slightly cheaper. And the beauty with this is because fortified whole grains are actually 5 times more nutritious than their refined counterparts. So if you are not spending any extra money and you are getting 5 times more nutrition, then it becomes quite compelling that people or population should then consider shifting from consumption of refined to whole foods that have been fortified. The other thing, of course, people will always ask, why is it then cost effective? Simply because in the processing part of it, most of the refined food we end up throwing away or sending 20 to 30% of the component of the grain to animal feeds. And unfortunately, this is usually the component that packed with the fiber, with jam, bran that carries along its essential fatty acids and quite a number of other bioactive compounds, and also minerals and nutrients. So unfortunately, we tend to feed our animals a little bit more healthier than what we over time gotten accustomed to consuming. So the other thing I would now want to give a synopsis about refined flour. And simply, what do we mean by refining? Refining is actually extracting part of the grain. And principally, like I've said, with maize and wheat, we normally take out the germ and the bran, and then we are left with the starchy endosperm, which is actually a nutrient poor but carbohydrate dense. And that is now what we are left for human consumption. Again, unfortunately, we end up throwing these healthier parts of the grain, and the carbohydrate nutrient poor global dietary patterns are actually fueling the cases of obesity and the nutrition pandemics. So it only makes sense, and a strong case for populations to start considering a shift towards consumption of fortified whole grains. Then the other element Magdalene wants me to focus on is the key processing standards. Normally, when I'm asked this question, I cannot detach it from 4 aspects that I consider goes into this, because food being a direct health impact, of course, in each and every region is regulated by standards. So we have standards that determine what you should do and what you should not do in terms of food production. So I like looking at it in terms of 4 aspects. And the 4 aspects I always like to look at is, one is an element of management, because there has to be an investor in food production that sets up the establishment that makes food. So from the beginning, there has to be a deep sense of management commitment, in that one has to allocate resources, and of course, one has to be committed to systems approach rather than having ad hoc elements of running the food processing. And of course, this is what we call the process approach, that things or the entire process should be guided by set of rules and set of do's and don'ts that are well documented, so that at the end we should always have a consistent product and quality. So that is very important. The other thing, in as long as it's well documented with the various standards that exist in each and every geography, is the facility. And for you to attain quality production, of course, you must have a facility that complies to or supports a production of quality products. In short, I always call it a fit for purpose production setup. And of course, there are basic tenets that one should be looking at. Of course, issues to do with ventilation, the building design itself, issues to do with drainage, and whether the whole place can favor actually quality production. Of course, mitigating issues like dust ingress and all that. And these are quite documented in each and every standard, regulatory standard that actually operates in each and every region. The other element, the third element I always look at when it comes to standard is actually a commitment to quality in terms of raw material and other inputs. And this principally relates to the managers of the food systems, because like they always say, garbage in, garbage out. So unless we have a deliberate decision on quality, meaning that we should establish a possible minimum acceptance criteria, whatever we are intaking, whether it's a grain, whether it's the additives, whether it's the water, and all that goes into processing, then we will not end up with quality production. So there has to be this deliberate decision that we, the owners or the managers of the business setups that produce food, should be able to commit to that. Then the bigger element now lives with what we call the value addition or the process. And there are two ways here. There is from the processor side, again, and also there is the regulatory compliance. On the side of the regulatory compliance, I think we have guidelines and standards that are well set. Then it lives on the process, more elements on the process, what needs then to be done. And the key thing here is there are quite a number of elements that need to be looked at. And one of them I look at is equipment. Equipments aid us to convert the inputs or the raw materials into quality products that then can be consumed. So there are general rules that we follow here. Of course, one of the first and most thing is that the equipment themselves must be of hygienic engineering design. And this is for simple reason, in that we need to facilitate cleaning and also maintenance. So the equipment themselves that are being used in production should be hygienically designed and engineered. The other issue we consider here and the equipment is also the material of construction. We should actually not use materials that will eventually, or in one way or the other, should contribute to contamination of food. And we always know that we have a general rule that any service of the equipment that is coming into contact with the food should always and preferably be of SS steel or stainless steel, so that we don't pose any element of contamination. Then there is a key thing that a number of establishments don't consider if there was no well thought process before starting. And this is what we call the layout plans. The facility should be laid in a way that it actually facilitates what we call one flow system, or we don't end up with in-process material, raw material, and finished products getting mixed up. So that we should have like what I might call a unicellular element or semblance of flow, where when you start with your raw material or your inputs, you should have like a continuous movement without coming back, so that you end up is like a chain. Once you start that chain, it should flow continuously up to the end without making some loop backs. And this helps a lot in eliminating any elements of cross-contamination. So it should be considered right at the beginning of the plan set out, and also the way we install the equipment. Then overally, of course, the equipment, they should be fit for purpose. They should be able to give exactly what the proprietor desired to get in terms of outputs and also quality. Then the other element under process I look at is what I normally call the production software. And this is essentially the element of personnel in terms of the skills and competencies, and also what we call a system approach setup. Because you might have all the equipment with you, but this equipment needs to be operated by people. Now, it's very important to have the requisite people manning the processes. And of course, they should be supported by established guidelines in terms of SOPs, GMP protocols. We have what we call the prerequisite programs that enhance or make sure that whatever you are moving into production is geared towards giving you quality product. We got hygiene practices. We also have other issues like online controls, and possibly where applicable, if the system is set in a way that it requires stepwise quality assurance, then of course it becomes important to set up internal labs. And most of the times, the best will be the ones that are mapped inside the process. And this, I always I recommend, they should not be looked at as for quality control department. Actually, this should be entrenched on the production personnel so that they are both manning the value addition or the conversion at the same time, doing it in a quality way. Now, all this should be coupled up with the knowledge or the element of continuous improvement concept, that whatever we do, every time we do, we should be geared towards improving the system. Step by step, we learn the mistakes we do, we learn with whatever we observe, and we set that as a basis for improving, so that continuously we are conscious that we need to improve. And this can be done through audits or through whichever system a production unit might set. Now, there is the last element that I always look at is finished goods, because you can do a good job in terms of value addition, but once you end up with a finished product and you don't take care of it, then of course you reverse the gains that you had done. So this covers basically two elements, the packaging and also the storage elements. Again, with the standards that we have, which are regionally based, we do have guidelines on what packaging materials to use for whatever product. So it's only important that we adhere to that, because they've been given with good intent that they end up protecting the product to preserve its quality, and also enable elements of that you can move the product from one place to the other without posing any danger. And the other element is on storage. We also know some spoilage elements with otherwise a good product that was produced in a very hygienic and a quality way can also get deterioration during storage. So the storage elements should be as per required in terms of ventilation, in terms of not keeping it to the floor so that it does not stand the element of picking up moisture, and also that we don't have elevated temperature that can quicken or hasten spoilage mechanism. And lastly, whatever we are designing the packaging to be, it should convey that element of convenience, because at the end of the day, customer is the king, and we should always package our product in a way that will deliver convenience to the customer. So I think with that, I would possibly pause there and take it back to Magdalene.
Okay, thank you so much, Jones. That was quite elaborate. I like how you broke down each component. It made it very easier for someone to understand what fortified whole grains are and how they are processed. It's quite elaborate, and I can only imagine, given that most of the millers in East Africa, or generally most of the millers that are processing these grades, are either medium scale or small scale millers. So how feasible are all these standards to them? How feasible is it for them to implement these, all the way from the equipment, production software, packaging, and even storage? How feasible is it? And maybe Jean-Claude, given that you're already in that industry, you can help us understand how feasible is it for millers to implement these standards, and what kind of support or resources is essential for implementation? Over to you, Jean-Claude.
Yeah, thank you, Magdalene, and thank you to all of the people who are following us. I always like to start with a very simple statement. It's feasible and it's possible. Though it's not that easy, it's not free, but it's possible for any miller at any level, at any size of the milling process. It takes quite a number of, considerations, and I think Jones has, touched every bite of it. I would probably interpret this or talk about it from the business perspective, just to make people understand in simple ways how the compliance, how the adoption of these standards can be actually accommodated in either an existing mill or a starting mill. The number one key point to consider, in my view, would be the commitment. I remember when we joined this initiative, we were well set in the refined industry. So the number one thing was to understand why we need to put an accent on the nutrition part of the milling. Because for most millers, of course, we are doing business, we are looking at profit part. But remember, in the case of our situation, we are dealing with the school feeding program here in Rwanda, meaning we are dealing with around 4 million children, that needs to be fed. The question was, do we understand the dynamics? Do we understand why this initiative of Fortified Whole Grain brings another very important aspect beyond the money, beyond the business, which is nutrition of the generation to come, the generation for tomorrow. So once that is done, what I mean by commitment is for any business structure, it can be an individual-owned company, it can be a shareholder-based company. In our case, our company is shareholder-owned. It has a board of directors. It has the structures of the management. So when we are committed, in my position as the managing director, I had the duty to convince everybody on board, including the board of directors, but mainly the staff, this production team. Why do we have to do this? What is this bringing as value addition to what we've been doing before? So when you have that level of commitment, you can, the rest is, following the steps and identifying the right people to support you whenever you need them. Once the decision was made, of course, you need to now start digging deep into technical knowledge and technology gaps. As Jones explained very well, the refined milling process and the fortified whole grain milling process are completely different. You need to understand what you need to bring new as part of the milling machines. They talk of dosifiers, fortificants. So when you understand, you can map out what you need to bring in as new. And here we go, you need to think of CapEx. You mentioned something to do with investments. Right from the setting, the setup of the factory, right from, I remember, probably we'll talk about it in some practical examples. You might find you need to adjust some of the setting of your buildings to comply with the required processes to produce fortified whole grain. So after that commitment, you also need to consider investment, which brings again the whole focus to convincing everyone, be it funders. You need to be able to explain either to your banker, to your board of directors, your shareholders, why do we need to do further investments? As business people, our key mission is always, as it's a standard thing, we minimize expenses and we maximize profits. But if you need to bring in new investment, you need to understand how does this bring value in the short and medium term. CapEx is very important. In our case, we had to review even the design of the buildings itself to adjust and adapt them to the compliance with the Rwanda FDA. We needed to import some parts to the point we even decided, why not actually thinking of running the existing facility, production line, producing a number of fortified whole grain and a number of refined, but with the aim to have a completely line dedicated to producing fortified whole grain, which is where we are now. So CapEx is a very key important point to consider, because you've got some investments to do, and you need to identify who are the key players in this whole process. I would mention the Fortified Whole Grain Alliance, who's been close to us day by day, training our staff, making actually understand some of the management decision makers, that's board members and other senior managers, to understand why we need to venture into this and what we have to expect in the future. So commitment is the keyword, because when it's there, the rest is just connecting with the right people who can add value, who can take you through the whole process and make this whole thing a reality. Today, we are venturing into a completely new line that will be able to produce 250 tons per day of fortified whole grain, which positions us in a good position in the market. If today in the school feeding industry in Rwanda, we talk about fortified whole grain, we are the first to be on the first line. So there is actually profit, but you need to anticipate, understand, align your team, align decision makers, and be able to highlight clearly what the value addition can be. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Jean-Claude. And I like how you started. Everything is feasible. Everything is possible. I love that energy. And also thank you for breaking down on how you started and how you've done it and how it's possible for the other millers, despite their size, to actually do it. And one of the things that you've mentioned in your discussion is a school feeding program, which takes us to the next part of this conversation. But before we move to the next part of this conversation, there's some conversations that are going on the chat. We really do appreciate that. You can also take your time to just go through that and get to see some of the comments that are coming from the people and some of the questions that are coming from the people. So thank you so much for staying with us up to this hour. We are 27 minutes into time, and we'll take this opportunity to move into the next session, or to move the conversation now onto the market side, which Jean-Claude already did touch briefly about. So Jones David, maybe we can start by you. We can start with you. From your perspective, what is the demand of fortified whole grains, or where's the demand coming from? How are you seeing the market trends, and are there any demand signals for these products?
Thank you, Magdalene, and I also want to thank Jean-Claude for that insightful comments, or actually is kind of wrapped up a lot of what I might want to say, and also actually what I said in terms of the technical package and also the market element of it. But straight to your question, I think it's important just to mention that we are actually trying just to go back to what we used to do, or what our forefathers used to do. Initially, grains actually used to be consumed in their whole form. And there are so many reasons, and justifiable reasons, as to how we ended up with shifting from whole grain to refined. And with that, the world has also gone through a lot of learnings, and also quite a bit of some unlearnings as well. So we are actually trying to go back to where we used to be, because it used to be the best way. And like I said, there were very compelling reasons as to why people moved to refined foods as of that time. But having said that, I think there has also been a deeper look at some of the reasons that made the people move from consumption of whole grains into refined, and then looking for solutions as to mitigate what I might call those barriers that prevented continued consumption of whole grains. Having said that, we still have quite a number of grains that are still consumed in their whole form, which is a good thing. And like I said before, whole grains are typically packed with their nutrients, the way nature gave them to us. And I've seen quite good charts and conversations on the charts and the comments. I think I would also encourage the attendees also to have a look at that. It's really quite good. Now, with that, there has been a lot of movement towards that. And one of it is being fueled by elements of NCDs, or the non-communicable diseases. A lot of research has shown, and well documented for that, there is a strong association of overconsumption of refined foods or highly processed foods to quite a number of these NCDs, the non-communicable diseases. And equally, research has also shown that there is also very strong associative elements of mitigating or deterring some of these NCDs with increased consumption of whole grains, or what we call optimal consumption of whole grains. And with that, there has been quite a lot of movement globally. And one of them, I would say, we've noticed quite a lot of increased demand, albeit I would say is not, at the moment, you cannot say is equally distributed, but I think we've seen a lot, especially in the developed world, people moving towards whole grains, or even what they call cleaner labels and all that. We've seen a lot of issues to do with advocacy or consumption of whole grains, with a lot of health accolades attributable. But having said that, I would possibly mention 4 key areas that I have noted that has kind of ignited the spark, so to speak, towards going back to consuming whole grains. And one of them is institutional demand. Many marketers will agree that when you're trying to promote a new product, the easier way is actually if you can capture the institutional demand because of the power of procurement and the quantities. And with this, we've seen, and where we participate a lot in, the element of school meals. And this, with constrained budgets and the need to feed children's healthy, and looking for bigger reach or bigger coverage with constrained budgets, I have seen a lot of shift towards changing the school meals or incorporating some of the healthier choices into the meal programs. And the easier way and a more cost-effective one has been incorporation of whole grains, because like I said from the beginning, we have demonstrated that whole grains can actually be produced in a cost-neutral way compared to their refined counterparts. And many school programs are looking into this, incorporating, and we know that there is the School Meals Coalition, which has close to, actually slightly more than 100 countries signed into, and each country, through their own ways, they're instituting issues to do with school feeding. And we are seeing very kind of consistent demand of how school feeding programs can then incorporate whole grains into their meals. So this is very important, as is a quicker and a very cost-effective strategy of mitigating in a quicker and cheaper way, mitigating malnutrition. So this is one thing I've seen. that there are a lot of governments have committed to increasing their budgetary allocation towards school feeding programs, which provide a very good pool or provide a very good, I would say, atmosphere in terms of creating that power procurement, in terms of expanding and providing a bigger space for growth of fortified whole grains. And at the same time, when we also look at this, we are kind of incorporating very healthy, conscious, good eating habits into very young minds, and they grow with it. And so I'm seeing consumption of fortified whole grains taking a leap and in a sustainable way, because people have come to acknowledge the nutrition element associated with it. And once this gets kind of fed into school children at the young age, they carry along the practice and they make it a kind of a habit. So I've also seen quite a bit of some development partners and NGOs pumping quite a lot of funds into supporting, of course, the same school feeding programs, and also putting emphasis on the meals and insisting or advising to use nutritious meals. And this is where fortified whole grains comes in handy. The other element I've seen, which is also causing shift towards increased consumption, is policy and regulatory shifts. There are some governments that have deliberately decided to input guidelines, especially with the school programs, strict guidelines that we should have an inclusion of fortified whole grains as part of the meals. A case in point is what Claude mentioned. In Rwanda, the government is just about to undertake a national rollout to all school programs that part of it should include fortified whole grains for healthy reasons. So this again is also having a spiral or a multiplier effect, because when the kids get to test the fortified whole grains from school, when they go back at home, they also ask their parents, possibly with time they develop the taste for whole grains, because of course whole grains, especially when we talk of maize, tends to be a little bit more what I would say sweeter, so to speak, for the ugali eaters, if you might allow me to use that. And once you develop that taste, you want to continue eat that. So this has a very good economic impact, now pushing the processors to also have similar products into the consumer market. And again, this because of this demand, I think naturally we should see increased demand, not only from the institutional portfolio, but also from the consumer demand, which now ensures a continuity. The other thing, of course, we know there has also been quite a bit of debate about actions on climate change, regenerative agriculture, and a lot of times we've seen this also being linked to school feeding and then being tied to fortified whole grains, because we definitely know that with whole grains, like I earlier said, we consume or we process the whole grain. So we don't end up losing the 20 to 30% that typically goes to animal food. So with these, you end up using less fertilizer, less water, less land. And of course, then this comes up with reduced GHGs or the gas, greenhouse gas emissions, because from one piece of a given piece of land, you are able to produce 30% more of the food that ideally, if you are to use the same production and you refine it, you'll get approximately possibly 70 to 80% of that goes to availing that agricultural output into food. And hence, this has also contributed to elements of food security and all that. And the other thing I've seen, of course, a number of associations, including FWGA and many other players, they've been conducting a lot of consumer research and disseminating this, which now then has created enhanced awareness within the general population on the benefits of fortified whole grains. And this has also been used by a number of organizations to create or to come up with social behavior change campaigns that then educates the consumers further, and this has also triggered kind of an increased demand. So the policy and the regulatory environment shifts. I have seen it kind of leading to increased demand. Then the other thing I would mention is the issue of what I earlier mentioned about rising health issues. We've had a lot of NCDs, non-communicable diseases, that have always been attached and supported by research, so to speak, on issues to do with the feeding habits. And the common recommendation when you read a lot of this research and all that, they always point to issues of suboptimal consumption of whole grains. So as people get more aware, they are kind of reverting back for the sake of enhancing their health. So the awareness about NCDs, what is causing them and all that, and increased consumer awareness is also tilting the scale from refined or highly processed to consumption of whole grains. Then lastly, I would mention there has also been a lot of efforts globally, a lot of movements advocating for increased consumption. We all know about the American Council of Whole Grains. Many people know about the well-known case of Denmark, the case of shifts and issues to do with the strict controls on labeling and all that. And we also have now the World Council or the World Summit on whole grains that is also predominantly that has focused predominantly on what I would say the global north. But now, like the last summit that was held early this year in Germany, we had heavy representation from what I might call the global south, and actually FWGA was equally represented. And there's a lot of interest on people creating that kind of an awareness into LMICs, the low and middle income countries. So this, in a nutshell, this global kind of awareness and movements, I'm also seeing them heavily shifting the awareness and consumption patterns from highly processed foods or refined food towards whole grain food. So I think I would say we are in a good space in terms of advocating for these good consumption habits. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Jones David. I think you've gone into real depth, just trying to unpack the institutional demand, the policy shifts that are supporting the demand of these grains, and also the raising health consciousness among the consumer markets. So maybe before we go to Jean-Claude, allow me to read a few comments. We got a comment from John Taylor, Professor John Taylor, saying that fortification is necessary because sadly, many people in Africa are very undernourished in terms of essential vitamins and minerals, what is referred to as micronutrient deficiency or malnutrition or hidden hunger. Furthermore, all cereals, that is maize, rice, and wheat, do not contain vitamin A. So we can see it's very essential. Fortification is very essential to enrich these products with essential nutrients. And then we got a question from Ayinde in Nigeria asking, our company is championing health eating by utilizing more of ancient grains, that is low carbs like sorghum and fonio. We are looking at further fortification, especially in vitamin A. What do you think should be used to fortify our sorghum and fonio flowers? Thank you, Professor John Taylor, for responding to that question. There are quite a number of questions and comments that are coming on the comment section. Please continue engaging. We really appreciate that. Now back to the conversation, and also seeing that we only have 10 minutes with us. So maybe Jean-Claude, Briefly, you can share your experience, given that you are a miller and you're working with these products already. You can just share your experience. How do you position these products in the market for consumers to purchase them, and what channels have worked for you? Because as a consumer, I can imagine in a market that is dominated by refined flours, and the sensory attributes for refined flours have been perceived to be of superior quality compared to fortified whole grain flours. So how do you position these products in the market to address such issues? And also in a place where culture somehow refined flour and fortified whole flour are attributed to a certain or to a specific social class. How do you address that to ensure that these products are moving in the market?
Thank you, Magdalene. And this is a very important question. We can talk about all the technical aspects, the science behind, but in the end, if it doesn't make business sense, it will never be interesting for any miller. In the beginning, I said this can be done. It's possible by any miller at any size, at any level. But in the main question now that everyone asks in our position as business leaders is, how do I make profit? How do I make money? Where is the market? So when you start the entire process, of course, you go to the marketplace, you don't find any. In Rwanda, people could be like, there are some in Kenya, but Kenya does not buy for me. There are some in South Africa. So for any miller, for any business-oriented organization, we need to have something that makes a business sense. Now, in our view, based on our experience, it's all about now being strategic, looking ahead. How do I invest in something now that can bring a greater opportunity in the future and position ourselves actually as an inevitable partner? John has talked about government. The first question is, who is the big buyer? In most of African countries, the big buyer is government. We're talking of school feeding program. These are schools. In our particular case, we are also the supplier to the army. These are people who buy in big volumes. So the first point is the awareness creation. You need to be able, with your team, with the support of all the organizations engaged in the whole process, Fortified Whole Grain Alliance is one of them, to be able to create awareness to who? To the key buyers, potential buyers, that is government. I remember in our experience, this whole process took more than 5 years. Actually, when I joined, the Fortified Whole Grain Alliance, in partnership with other partners, they had started earlier before. But when you unlock that phase of creating that awareness, making people, the big buyers, understand that this is the best way to go, then you've got it. This is the opportunity for the future. The second one is to strive through the acceptability of the product. This brings me back to the consumer behavior. People would base their choice of buying on the color, for example, but no one will ever talk about nutrition. So we need to be able to make people understand, if we need to make a decision, what do we base on? Do we base on the color? Do we base on the habit? Do we base on what we've been eating? Or do we base on something that is substantial, which is nutrition? Once this is done, then you come back to internal arrangements. I have created awareness. People might be willing to tell me, you know what, can you give me a sample? Now here comes the question, can you produce it? Those are some of the aspects that John's talked about, the storage, the labs, the shelf life issue, which we mentioned before. But all in all, the whole point here is strategizing to position ourselves not for now, but for the future. Once this is taken, I'll give you an example. Rwanda has an objective of feeding 4 million kids. That is every day, not every month. So once this is taken, then you're in the business. So my message to the millers, yes, we need to think business now. We also need to think strategy in the future. One last point is, today, all the efforts we made are bringing fruits. When we are sitting on the procurement table, Maui Grain Millers is taking the biggest part of the cake because that production capacity, those trainings, compliances have been the investment made before. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Jean-Claude, for just guiding some of the processors that are joining this conversation on how to go about it. And what is coming out very clearly is awareness is key. Awareness to the consumers or the potential market of these flowers. Thank you so much for that. And it's been such a great conversation. I can see the comment section is also very, very engaging. Thanks a lot, Professor John Taylor and David Kamau. I see you've been responding to some of the questions or most of the questions that are coming from the comment section. So maybe just quickly, maybe just to respond to two questions. The first question is addressed to Jean-Claude. Is there any change in the visual appearance of fortified whole grain flour? So there's that question. There's someone that wants to understand or to know if there's any change. So maybe you can respond to that, and then we can pick one technical question, and then before we end the conversation. So Jean-Claude, back to you with that.
Yeah, thank you, Magdalene, and thank you for the person who asked the question. The answer is yes. When you look at fortified whole grain flour and refined flour, there is a big difference in terms of color, because you may understand it's the normal maize, the whole maize that has the outer part which tends to be yellow, that you have added some nutrients which include vitamins, zincs, and other nutrients. So yes, there is a slight change in color, which is why we always go by focusing on why do we take this, the nutrition part, rather than encouraging people to decide based on the color. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for that question, for that response. Maybe one more question before we close is a question from Augustine. Can modified atmosphere packaging MAP improve the shelf life of fortified whole grains and their fortified products? So maybe Jones, you can respond to this.
Thank you for that question. And MAP, as it is called, is I would say is basically a preservation method, a food preservation method. When you are looking at whole grains and you dig deeper to the real issues that possibly make them have short life, then MAP does not adequately address that. The bigger thing with whole grains, especially with maize and wheat, is actually the presence of the high fat content, which is normally contained in the germ that we don't remove during processing. And we know that because of the presence of enzymes, and principally the lipases enzymes, the lipids will undergo oxidation with time, then it tends to develop that kind of rancid flavor. So the better thing is actually to address the causative agent, especially for rancidity, and MAP will not adequately address that. So we have done a lot of research and development with many research institutions, and this still continues. And for fortified whole grain maize meal, with the work that we've done in Rwanda, we've undertaken 2 studies. One is accelerated shelf life study, and then the other one was a real-time shelf life study. And after running quite a bit of some trials and all that, we basically settled on a thermal treatment of the whole maize grain kernels that tended to reduce the lipase and the peroxidase activity, and that has enabled us attain a 5-month shelf life on fortified whole grain maize flour. And the thermal treatment was basically to reduce the whole grains kernels moisture to slightly lower than the typical storage moisture, from 13.5 around 14 to 11 to 11.5. So this has given us some good results, and we keep on undertaking a lot of research and development studies to see how further we can stabilize different types of fortified whole grains. Of course, each will be different depending on what grain we are talking about. But again, you can always reach to us, and we can suggest, depending on what we have done and what we know might retard some of these or might extend the storage shelf life for whatever fortified whole grain is concerned. Of course, we'll not. With rice is a totally different ballgame because the only way you can deliver rice is actually through parboiling, and which is a totally different technology. But we are available for any suggestion or any concern one might have. We will be able to take you through whichever product you could be looking at. I would want to stop at that, and I hope I've answered your question adequately. Thank you. Back to you, Magdalene.
Thank you so much, Jones, for that response. I think clearly this is a conversation that requires more than an hour. There are so many questions that are coming in. There are so many things that you need to unpack, especially for that needs to be unpacked, especially for the different grains that we are talking about. So this is a conversation that is going to continue, and for someone that is looking for more information or where you can access resources on some of these technical aspects of processing and fortification, we do have some resources on our website, Fortified World Grain Alliance. You can just go to our website and get to download some of those resources there. And I know we are top of the hour. So there's one pressing question here that, Jones, maybe in a minute you can respond to it before we close. So Danson is asking, you have talked about having stainless steel machinery. Many small posho mills use non-stainless steel posho mills. Does this mean it's dangerous or unhygienic? Please respond to that maybe in a minute or so.
I will be very brief. The question is, the answer is yes and no, and I'll quickly want to say the yes part, because as you keep on using equipment, there is always continued wear and tear. So if there is no mechanism that then can be put in place to ensure that whatever is wearing off from especially ferrous metals within the architecture of the system, then that slowly ends up in your product. And again, we all know the effects of that. Then the no part is that, like I said, stainless steel is quite expensive, and we always recommend, especially where we talk of like the terminal end of production line, and we don't have any recourse that can possibly mitigate what could have gone there, especially ferrous contaminants. We always recommend SS or stainless steel. But now we have systems, and that's why we talk of magnets fitted on the lines, both on the process side and also on the raw material side, that are able to attract or capture whatever could have accidentally or through the normal process of wear and tear that could have gotten into the product. And there are protocols and standards for this. There are also guidelines on what kind of magnets and what strength of magnets you can use, where they can be fitted, frequency of cleaning, and how to ascertain all that. So this ensures that at least we don't have a possibility of contamination from non-stainless steel components through wear and tear, normal wear and tear, getting into your food substance. So I think it can be adequately addressed with the requisite device and technology in place. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Jones. Quite clear. I think it's been quite a fruitful, engaging conversation, discussion. You can tell that from the comments section. So many comments are coming in, so many questions are coming in. Unfortunately, we are not able to respond to all the questions now, but be sure that you're going to respond to some of these questions through our social media platforms. So feel free to follow us on our LinkedIn page. We're going to be responding or addressing some of these concerns. Or also, we can also have another webinar just to delve further into this conversation. Thank you so much for engaging with us. I see the farmer here saying, I love how they are explaining things. It really made it much easier to understand how things are done. Thank you so much. This is for you, Jones David and Jean Claude. People love how you are elaborating or explaining things in this conversation. So that brings us to the end of this session. A big thank you to Jones David and Jean Claude for being here, for sharing insights, for sharing practical knowledge with everyone that joined today's conversation. I think top of mind key takeaways is these grains being largely consumed in most households in Africa and globally. They have enormous potential to change the nutrition landscape, to address the issues of malnutrition, which is a growing concern in Africa. So they have that enormous potential. And besides that, they also have a commercial viability, as we've heard from Amila himself. So, and the other thing is, despite maybe a bit advancement or the processing techniques, it's also possible for millers, despite you being a small scale miller or a large scale miller or a medium scale miller, it's possible to maneuver and to follow these standards, and the demand is there. The market is growing both from institutional and consumer market as people continue to be more conscious of what they're eating and to seek or sort out for more nutritious foods. So demand is growing. It's to our processors. How can we meet that demand, or how can we address the growing demand? So thank you everyone who joined this conversation. It was such a pleasure to have you as part of the conversation. This conversation is going to be available on LinkedIn, so feel free to download it. Feel free to share it with your network, to re-listen it if you need to, and we'll try our best to respond to all the comments or all the questions that have come in, and if not, address them. Also, a big thank you to Fortified World Grain Alliance, who are the sponsors of this webinar. Fortified World Grain Alliance is an organization committed to promoting the production and consumption of fortified whole grains in Africa and globally in a way to address the triple burden of malnutrition, not just undernutrition, not just micronutrient deficiencies, but also diet-related non-communicable diseases such as cancers, diabetes, and cardiovascular diseases. So thank you so much. My name is Magdalene Muidali. I was your moderator for the last 1 hour. Until next time, stay informed and stay connected. Thank you so much.